Hey everybody, welcome back to a new video on this channel, and today we have a look into the difference of Nuxt build and Nuxt generate. Let's go! Folks, when you take a look at the brand new Nuxt.js application and then open the package.json, you might see various scripts in there already, such as starting the dev mode, previewing, but also build and generate. But you might wonder, okay, what's the difference between these two? Because they sound like they kind of do the same. And are there limitations to one or another? Well, this is what we want to figure out in this short but sweet video. So let's dive into a demo application, which code you might already know, and then build it with the one command, with the other command, see the differences, see what works and doesn't work, and explain why that's the case. As just mentioned, yes, you might recognize that Nuxt config here from one of the previous videos, the previous video about route rules in Nuxt.js, because why not just reusing the same thing? Because it's also about these route rules to see a difference between the Nuxt build and Nuxt generate. The rest is all the same. We have the usual dark background and somewhat white text, so we don't get a flash of light mode in our browser output. And then we have the compatibility version set to 4 to make sure we opt into the Nuxt changes of Nuxt 4 and be on the future side here. We have the DevTools enabled and have the compatibility date set. That shouldn't change much here anyway. And as just mentioned, yeah, package.json, we see these two commands, Nuxt generate, and we also see Nuxt build. And if we take a look at the rest of the application, we have an app.view here. The app.view, okay, it does something when we use Node.js. If you wonder what this exactly is doing, then check out the other video about route rules. There I explain it all in detail. It's not an important, luckily, for this video, but it's interesting to see because we start by having no routing in here straight away, right? So we don't have anything set up in terms of pages. We just have an app folder with app.view in here, and we have defined some route rules over here. And now let's see what happens when we actually run the whole thing and start it in dev mode. And the dev mode looks also similar to the video before. We have a little count button here and it works. And there are some routes that do specific things. So one of the routes that is special is, for example, the /spa route. And in here, you will see nothing. And then after that nothing, you will see the whole content rendered, because this is only rendered on the client side, not on the server side, thanks to the route rules. But okay, so far so good. This does seem pretty usual. How does the whole thing now work when we actually build it? But what's with build and what's with generate? Let's start with generate and see what will happen. When running the pnpm generate command, we use the Nitro static server preset that was shown up here, scrolling a bit up here. And that means, okay, no matter where you want to deploy, you always use this static preset. Of course, some providers might have their own static preset because there might be a few things set, but this is the general version for all. And then, of course, the usual parts, we build our client, we build the server. So we have the server-side bundle, client-side bundle, and then initializing pre-render, right? And then 4 routes are pre-rendered initially, the 200 HTML, the 404 HTML, the index, and apparently also ABC pre-render. We'll come to that in a second why that's the case. And then we get some payload. Eventually, in our output folder, there we have public part, and let's see what actually got in there. By taking a look in our Explorer here in VS Code and say output, public, and here we have exactly these files, the payloads, so any API call made is saved in these payload files. That's wonderful. And also the JavaScript for Nuxt, for the arrow page, and so on and so on. So let's just run that. And we can run it by just running npx serve.output.public as mentioned down here. So if we do this, and let's define another port here, let's say 3001, just to not mix up with the dev port. That's a best practice I personally prefer a lot. So I don't have, I don't know, any dangling service worker somewhere. Let's see what happens after serving this. And okay, in here we see more or less the same thing. Everything is there. Also, we see, okay, the count button still works, but interestingly, now there are a few things that are different. Because first of all, there is, besides the serve server, right, which could be just an Apache, Nginx, or whatever, there is no server running. If you've seen it in the output, and we can also just take another look in there, there's just plain static files. So we don't have any, I don't know, server, index, MJS that we run. This is all that's been served. So it's fully static. You can put it on any kind of VPS, or you could put that on GitHub pages and everywhere technically, right? Just on a CDN. But that also means there are some downsides. Because if we take a look on our app.view here, we have a use fetch call to /API/data. So let's try to reach that on our, let's say, semi-deployed application. If we type in /API/data and press enter, we see, wait, that doesn't give us any results. While it should, right? We defined a Nitro API endpoint for that to actually get some data. And let's just double check it in the code as well. Yep, it's there and it should give some data. But, well, should it though? No, not really, because as we just said, these are only static files. So there is no API, no Nitro server running, no H3, nothing, even no Nuxt.js server part, because it all happened on build side. This is plain static site generation. This is why, well, no caching besides just here's the file, it's static, that's it. No SWR, no ISR will work at all. The only thing what you can do, of course, is you can say, let's pre-render more sites. Let's fall back to a single page application. That's also why this weird route, the /API/data was even shown, because then this is just rendered as a plain SPA, as a fallback, which is important if you have a 404, for example. So there are some options there, but in the end, you can decide SPA or pre-rendered. Now, of course, what you can do is you could even pre-render that /API/data route. So let's just do that. To ensure your pre-render routes, you have various options, and one of them is already in here. The pre-render route allows us to pre-render routes no matter which mode you use. So in generate, this is also checked. But of course, we could say, okay, /API/data, and then we put in a pre-render true here, but we don't even have to do that. There is another way, because of course, we can also configure that. Then, because pre-rendering is part of the Nitro server at build time, we need to use Nitro here as a top level key, and then put in pre-render. And here we have some options. So here we can say, for example, which routes should be pre-rendered, like /API/data. The default, of course, is always / for the start. And from there, if there are any routes linked, so in the HTML that was rendered, then of course they will also try to be pre-rendered unless they're not part of the application. So if google.com is there, for example, it won't be tried to be pre-rendered there, right? Don't worry. But if it's, for example, /user/abc, then that might be tried. And if it's working, if there's no error, then that's the case as well. So once again, Nuxt generate means only plain old static files. There's no API. And now when we once again render our site, we will see that even with the pre-rendered API data. After rendering again, we also see that we have 5 initial routes with the crawler. It doesn't matter here because, well, we don't have any things linked, but we now defined API data as well. And if we open the output file, then this is also under API data in here, and it contains some data. Surprise, surprise. Now, the interesting part is though, this should be a dynamic API response when you have an actual server running. But now this is of course only included at build time. And this can also differ from the results that we have in our app.view, because this request from useFetch is also baked in. That's why we have the payload file. So if we now take a look at _payload.json and then scroll a little bit, maybe let me quickly remove this, we also see a date and time over here, because this is the data that happened to be there when the index page was rendered. Same for the ABC pre-render part. We also have there a payload.json. We have a different time here as well, because it was rendered on a different time. And if we remember, the data.ts outputs always the current date after a little bit of time here. So if you use Nuxt generate, you basically have choices per page, but they're very limited. You either say, okay, render all the pages that are there on the server at build time, so classic static site generation, or leave some out and make sure they're there as SPA fallback, great for error pages, great for things behind authentication. So everything that you don't render by maybe crawling it through Nuxt or by specifying it manually, that will be available through an SPA fallback, which also means if you go to it directly, there might be a 404 or there will always be a 200 error code depending on how your server platform is set up. But usually that's not as good for SEO, so everything SEO relevant should be pre-rendered, should be rendered at build time on the server, so classic static site generation. But what if you want to pre-render certain parts, but still have your API, still have SWR and ISR? Well, then you have to use Nuxt build. If we now just run the pnpm build command, which triggers the Nuxt build, we will get a vastly different result in the output folder, because there will still be pre-rendering initialized, mainly because we defined it, right? We didn't change anything in the code here. So what happened is, oh yeah, right, we have this ABC pre-render route rule, and also we have this defined in here, nitro pre-render routes, and these two routes, they will be pre-rendered all the time. So you can still have the pre-rendering. And we clearly see this over here based on the two routes being pre-rendered. Lovely. But now everything else is happening on the server. So you also see that the command to preview this build or to actually execute it is different, because now you actually need Node to run it. Before, well, any kind of server that just serves files would be fine. But now, of course, we have to run Node and then access.output server index.mjs. Before we do that, let's have a quick look on what's in there. Of course, we still have the public folder, but now we also have a server here because, as mentioned, there's actually a server running. We have something node-based. Of course, if you would use a different preset, it could be optimized for Cloudflare Workers, for Edge, for wherever you want to deploy it, Netlify, Vercel, and so on and so on. And we also have the chunks here, so the full server build, which we really wouldn't need if we just use generate. And if we now run the whole thing, maybe also use the port 3001 just to make sure that we don't interfere with our dev environment, as I mentioned, practice, and check out what's happening now, well, then we see, okay, the same page, that works fine. But of course, if you refresh it, you might wonder, down here the current date is updated, but this isn't. How come that? Well, let's go to /API/data and we see there is some data, but it's not updating. What's wrong? Did we use a wrong command? Did we break something? Is there a bug in Nuxt? No, absolutely not. We decided to pre-render /API/data. And of course, if it's pre-rendered, then the underlying Nitro server will say, okay, great. We'll just take the result from the pre-rendered page because you told us that's what you want. I don't have to execute my server function there at all. If we wouldn't pre-render it, well, then we would always get the fresh data. So let's have a look how that works in a second. For that, of course, we have to remove that routes entry and then just build the application once again as before with our pnpm build, or if you have npm run build. Now only one route is pre-rendered as expected, the ABC pre-render route, and we can now run the same thing as before, start our server, and now we'll see what happens when we actually hit the API data endpoint. And perfect, we get the data also with a significant delay because we still have that sleep for 3 seconds in there to showcase that the data is actually changing. So that's also a big difference to before. And now, of course, everything still works as it should. If we access localhost 3001 in this case, we still see this. We have the client-side part still working. That's great. And all our other route rules also still work. And if we now take /abc-pre-render here, for example, then we see the old date because this is when pre-rendering happened, right? This is the data from then. So even if we refresh the page, it's instantaneous because it's already pre-rendered and we're good. But still, we also have other pages set up with other route rules. So for example, we have /10, which is just cached for 10 seconds. So let's open that. The first one, as also shown in the route rules video, will take a while, and now it's cached here. That's just one of many examples. So just to make sure, if you want to be able to just send your file somewhere, it's a static page, you don't need any kind of API at runtime and at build time is enough, perfect. Generate is the way to go. Use webhooks to retrigger a build, for example, and you're fine. But if you need an API running, if you need advanced caching like SWR, ISR, right? And you still maybe want to pre-render 1 or 2 routes that's also working as we just seen, then you should use Nuxt build. I hope that kind of made sense and you now know the difference between the Nuxt build command and the Nuxt generate command. Now let me know, how do you deploy? What do you use? And did you know it before? Of course, drop it in the comments and stay tuned for more videos. Check also the later ones as well as the newest Deja Vu episode. See you soon, folks. Happy hacking.